Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Places You'll Go show, sponsored by Marketing Skills Trust and the Marketing Lounge Partnership. Thank you to both. We have another fabulous guest today in the highly impressive David Wheldon OBE. Welcome, David.
Morning, Mark. Morning, Ritchie. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's fabulous to have you on, and I'm going to tell everyone a little bit about you. Probably don't need too much introduction, to be fair. But anyway, for the record, I would say you're one of the most heralded marketers on the planet.
Oh, crikey.
So let's just dig into that. Fellow of the IPA, Fellow of the Marketing Society, Drum Award for Lifetime Achievement in Marketing, President Emeritus of the WFA, and OBE in the 2022 Queen's New Year's Honours List. And I guess that was the last Queen's New Year's Honours List, so maybe extra special there for your services to advertising and marketing. But if we just rewind a little bit, you started at agency side at Saatchi's for 6 years, moved client side for Coke, so that's an interesting thing to dig into. Flipped again, became president of BBDO Europe, and then did a little interesting 1, 2, 3, CEO of a company called Tempus, which was then acquired by WPP, and then went on to set up a Vodafone team, and then joined Vodafone as global director of brand. Did a bit of consultancy. You were at Barclays for 3 years, RBS for 5 years. So many other accolades. Advisory board for Teenage Cancer Trust, Accenture Solomon Lansons, Donmar Warehouse, Ned for Pablo. A big shout out to Gareth Mercer and also Ben Kay, who's been on the show. President of the WFA 2015 to 19. And you also do your own pod as well, which everybody should check out. But I'm going to end this little intro with a nice thing. We asked Jess Myers, who's also been on the show, what's David like? What's he like to work for? And she said, David is a great mentor. Having the opportunity to work for David was one of the most significant chapters of my career, and it was certainly a point of acceleration. David is the guru in building purpose-led growth brands. Working with him was a gift, and like a sponge, I absorbed everything he taught me. David is a master of influencing and bringing people on the journey with him. Today, David is still one of my most trusted advisors. I often say, surround yourself with rock stars, and David is definitely a rock star. So welcome, rock star David Wheldon OBE.
That's very embarrassing. I think let's just give up now, shall we? It's been great. Thank you so much. Bye.
We don't let you off that easy, David. We're just getting started, Mr. Rockstar. There we go. David, how are you doing? Where are you? Where are you at the moment? What's been going on?
I'm at home in Ealing, and I'm very well, thank you. And I'm enjoying a slower year when it comes to work. A lot more travel, a lot more fun. In fact, doing what I would have done had COVID not so brutally interrupted us all back in 2020 when I stepped down. But I'm keeping the brain engaged too, but I'm very well, Ritchie. And you, all good with you?
Yeah, I think so, David. I can't say, it's been as hectic perhaps on the travel front for me. 2 young kids at home, and it means that it's a bit hectic on a different way, I guess, and running School of Marketing too. So yeah, a good start to 2023, I think.
Yeah, it's where your stress comes from though, isn't it? Because I was telling my eldest son, we were just in Madrid, and we have our first grandson, wonderful first grandchild, 7.5 months old. And I was trying to put up the travel cot that somebody had lent us, and I couldn't. And it turned out it was broken. And then we had to order a travel cot. We had 1 day to order a new travel cot. And I sat there thinking, what is this weird feeling I've got? I said, good God, I'm stressed. I'm totally stressed. I haven't been stressed like this for 3 years. So my life is putting up a travel cot.
Well, I hear you, and I hear you a lot. I've become sort of from zero in the DIY front. I'm sort of the kingpin on that front in my household, and like you, I can't put up a travel cart either. So you can only imagine the level we're playing at here. So yes, stress in many different ways. There we go. Over to you, Mark.
The stress of children and grandchildren. I'm sort of twitching a bit, remembering that our daughter came 6 weeks early, and we hadn't even thought about travel cots and decoration. But anyway, so David, enjoying a less stressed time apart from travel cots. And we are emerging from the pandemic. I think people have come back into 2023 with a bit more energy. From your purview, what are you noticing about what's going on in the world and in the world of marketing?
Well, first of all, I think this has been a golden time for marketing, and that marketing really stepped up through the pandemic in so many ways, which has been great to see. What's been really enjoyable is having the time to read a bit more, look at what people are up to, and continue to learn, because there's a lot to learn. So, whether it's how everybody adapted to flexible working, this technology, and Mark, I think you were the first person that had told me in one of our Pablo events, as you were coming out of the pandemic, one of the things you saw is that hybrid meetings didn't work. You couldn't do 6 people in a room and 10 people on a screen because the dynamics don't work. But what's wonderful is the world of work has changed forever. So I see much more power in the hands of the people that work for the companies than I do in the people that own them. I think that's fabulous. And that too is a side impact, and a lot more attention to the people that do the work, all enabled by tech, which is of course the great enabler in so many ways. But in my WFA days, I was extremely critical of what the big tech companies were doing, and in a way, they've been going through their difficult patches as well. But we shouldn't forget it's tech that enables us all to do a better job. So, whether it's Jess, who's doing a fantastic job, and by the way, Jess, thank you for saying that. Wonderful to watch people that have worked with me be so successful, and how they're usually successful is by focusing on their customers, focusing on the people that work for them, focusing on the work, and getting the job done to the best of their abilities, and indeed having fun and enjoying themselves. And I see that too. But let's not be naive here. It's also been a stressful time in so many ways. Changes in the tops of companies and in shareholder pressure has led to a lot of people moving on, as everybody gets to say, losing their jobs, finding a different way of thinking about things. That's tough as well. So I really enjoy mentoring people, but I see incredible energy in marketeers, probably more than I remember at any time, actually. I mean, in the golden days of the 80s, when I was an ad man and advertising was what we all thought was marketing, there was a lot of energy, a lot of fun, a lot of drive, and actually a lot of successful work too. But I think it's changed. I think it's changed for the better. And I must finish by saying it's wonderful to see the return of kindness. I think people are being more thoughtful with each other, more thoughtful inside companies, and indeed, therefore, more thoughtful with the customers who benefit from what we all do. So, yeah, good times altogether.
How wonderful. And what a wonderful vantage point. So many different things you've just picked up on there, David. I've jotted down a whole plethora of them. What I particularly liked is when you talked about the role of learning. And I perhaps want to pick up on that a little bit. And you've mentioned a few things about some of the key macro trends that have taken place. But what have you learned personally, perhaps over the last couple of months, whether that be in marketing or in life more generally, besides travel costs, of course?
Well, I'm not sure I've learned travel costs. I mean, I hope I've learned that you never know everything there is to know in this space. And, one of the problems that intros like yours causes me, Mark, lovely though it was, is I must keep my feet on the ground. I have to remind myself that, relatively speaking, I know nothing, and it's awfully flattering to hear all the nice things. But there's so much to learn. You can learn constantly. And, my respect for those that have balanced the digital marketing drive and the brand building drive has grown exponentially. And Direct Line, fabulous example of effectiveness. Mark, what a legacy you had there. But, when I look at what TUI did, how TUI got through the pandemic, refocused on what they were doing, came out with great purpose-driven work, fun, brilliant, cut through, and good for business too. And you listen to that case study at the Marketing Society. So much to learn. So I've really enjoyed re-engaging with the learning side in the broader sense, so for my own purposes. And then to flip down, I never think mentoring anybody is any use to them. And I am totally blown away by the things I get back or the things I read and go, wow, I had no idea that tiny intervention would make such an impact. So, for all of us in this phase of our careers, the most important thing I think we can do is to help other people and give back and take time to spend with the young'uns who are hungry to learn and hungry to drive ahead. And Ritchie, I love the School of Marketing, as you know. I think you've done really thoughtful things there, and everybody should try and make sure you can continue to do that, because of course the economic impact we should then get to, because what that means is all budgets are tight and all people are going, oh, I'd love to support the School of Marketing, but I'm not sure. And, maybe next year, Ritchie, and you'll have some disappointing conversations, but I enjoy constantly learning. It's odd when you slow right down. I already gave the example of stress, but that thing when you suddenly go, okay, well, what's really important here and what doesn't actually matter that much, and to focus on the essential things. When I mentor people, I always recommend a book called Essentialism, which I then follow immediately by saying it's all in the title. And luckily enough, those geniuses that summarize books have done a 6-page summary, so you don't have to wade through the whole thing like I did. But hats off to whoever wrote it, because that is, it is all about, you know, what matters in the job I'm doing, what matters in my life, how am I going to make a difference, and how do I focus on those things, and how do I not get distracted by all of the other, what's the word I'm looking for, bollocks. Because you can get, especially in the corporate world, you can get so distracted by things that are really, really irrelevant. And to remember how to do that is tricky.
Wow, so many pearls of wisdom there. Watch out for the irrelevant distractions. Just on the mentoring, we've already heard from Jess, the role that you've played. I'm sure you do that formally and informally. But something you said reminded me that what's blindingly obvious to you, because of your experiences in life and work, are blind to others because they haven't had those experiences. So the value exchange of mentoring is enormous. But I want to go back to what you said about having fun and enjoying it. And your career is fascinating for the fact that you've straddled and traversed between client and agency side. And so it's, I know you have to love all your babies equally, but what's more fun, client side or agency side?
Oh, that is such a great question. And in a way, you'd have to unpack what fun is. Because on the client side, you get the fun of actually seeing it from start to finish and being accountable for making it happen, and whatever it is, and being accountable for the results, good or bad, on the other side. So the satisfaction of the work that you can do is real fun. And, you know, building teams, working with great people, meandering your way through the nonsenses of corporate life to still get an end result. You know, so that was fun. But you'll notice, for those that are unpacking the word fun, most of them won't be going, that doesn't sound like much fun. So there's no doubt that on the agency side, you know, the fun to be had because of the really eclectic mix of people you come across, and you know, many people, this is an unfair thing I used to say, which I think is incorrect, but, you know, most creative people I met early in my career weren't really in advertising because they wanted to do great advertising. They wanted to do something else, whether it was write a film or a book or a play or something. And as it happened, they would then do ads. These days, more people are in it because they want to do the ads and the creativity. But, you know, you get this eclectic mix of people where it's fun. You get to do great work. So I always remember the intensity of a pitch, for instance, and how exciting that is to kind of pull it all together. And when you finished, or I personally always used to get pitch blues, however well it had gone. I used to have this amazing, felt like being depressed actually. Oh, crikey. And then you have to sit there and wait, and, you know, more times than not, certainly in my low days, get the, you were fantastic, went so well, but just such a close second. Which is awful because people put their heart and souls into it. So the fun of winning and losing, the camaraderie of an agency, the focus on doing things the right way, you know, that's great fun too. And of course, I had the 80s version of that as well, which included the odd lunch now and again, and, you know, pre-mobile phones, pre-computers, and clients who would ring you up and go, I've got to come down for a meeting. I won't say who, but if he does listen to this, he knows who it is. And I go, but we don't need a meeting. We're fully up to date. You said, you know what I mean. I've got to come down for a meeting. And I was thinking we could meet at 12 and then maybe have a quick lunch. And I would shovel said person back onto the train about 9 in the evening, having had a very long lunch. So that was a different kind of fun. And obviously life has moved on, but it's all, yeah, we're lucky. We work in marketing. Marketing is fun. I think if you approach this with the positive mindset, the thing is fun. The impact and influence you can have is beyond actually what you do. But the humility required to make that all work is then the flip balance of that. Because, you know, the 80s version of many a marketeer I met, I will remember as kind of swaggering egos and basically bullies, and people who would suffer at the hands of society today. Whereas to be successful now, you've got to need a totally different model, much more humble, much more focused, much more thoughtful. And that's great to see too. But it's, That was a long answer, wasn't it? But I think marketing is fun. Both sides are fun. I think you learn so much by doing both sides, and I always urge people to try and get that along the way, because it broadens you. So that thing when if you've only ever been a client and it occurs to you at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon that you're not quite ready for the meeting at 8 o'clock on Monday, it's deadly easy to send that problem to somebody else and go, so if you could send it to me on Sunday evening, that would be great. That's awful, actually. So you need to remember that everybody's got a life to lead. Everybody's got stresses and strains, and just because you've got all the cards as a client, you have to play them very fairly and respectfully the other side of the table. And I think people who've been in agencies get that more. I mean, that's not slightly unfair of me to suggest that if you haven't been, you don't. But
I thought that was a really nice nugget of insight there when you talked about having, clients having all the cards, and whether that be often talked about a buyer market versus supplier market, and how actually true partnerships are when they kind of come together, and there is that degree of empathy between both sides of understanding, which then creates great work. But I want to turn the page just a little bit here, David, and we just obviously celebrated International Women's Day, not just a few days ago. And I just want to get your take, having seen the vantage point of what's gone on before across the industry. Have you seen a progression when it comes to gender equality across the industry, or do we have a lot more to go? Just want to get your sense and scope, given the context of the last few days.
First of all, what do I know? Because I'm not a woman. So how it feels. But I'll give you a few data points. So I see progression, but it's not fast enough, is it? And it's not thoughtful enough. But if I do, my last full-time job was the first time I'd ever arrived in a team where all of my direct reports were men. When I left, my direct reports were 50-50 and some, because that's the way society is and that's the way it should be. So I think it depends on individuals to make this happen, and individual leaders. When I left what's now the NatWest Group, I couldn't have been more delighted than to sit at the back of Alison Rose's first strategy meeting, watching her wheel out the new purpose, supported by the CFO, the fabulous Katie Murray. That's a bank with a woman CFO and a woman CEO. That is remarkable progress in and of itself. And if you watch, Dame Alison Rose, if you listen to Dame Alison Rose, she's worked tirelessly to try and drive this agenda in its full breadth. I was enjoying reading, what she talked about when she was on a trip in India recently. But you can see, if you then get under all of that and look at the data, it's just not where it should be. And interesting reading, those that go, isn't this nonsense that we need this day to write all this stuff? Why isn't this happening day in, day out? And why isn't there a focus on driving stuff ahead? But if you look, I don't know what the CMO data is. I'll ask the WFA. It'd be interesting, but remarkable number of women at the top of marketing organizations now, compared to, if I go back to the 80s, I think I came across one significant marketeer who was a woman in all of our client base. What a terrible thing to say. But so now totally different. I think you're probably closer to 60-40 in favor of women, actually, depending on the sector, of course. But that's fabulous to see.
Yeah, it's nice. I think it's nice. I feel quite proud that marketing is leaning. My optic is leaning into these conversations more around DEI than maybe some other functional specialisms. But as you say, long way to go. But Dame Alison Rose and others, obviously Penny at Direct Line, still not enough. But ever onwards. Now, I want to, we probably should have done this earlier, but go all the way back to understand how you started, how you got into Saatchi's. What was the beginning of this amazing journey? Was it accidental? Was it very deliberate? How did it all begin?
Oh no, that's I love that question, because it was both deliberate and accidental. So I meandered through my late teens and study at the University of Kent, and I'm a kind of disgrace to the education system that the 6 weeks I put in at the end of 3 years got me a 2-2. I don't think it would work like that anymore. And then I didn't know what to do, so I kind of meandered across Europe, became an English teacher, and ended up living in Germany for a while, and that was all fun, great. Fell in love as you do, fell out of love as you do, all of that. But had this kind of, I'm sure I could do something else. Now, what else could I do? So I looked at these skills I thought I had learned, and I also looked at advertising and thought I could probably do that, actually. So then when I came back to the UK, that was in 1981, I thought, oh, right, I've definitely spotted what I want to do. And first thing I did was anybody I'd ever met who knew anybody who was in advertising, I would kind of harangue them, say, can I come and have a cup of coffee and a chat? And, and people would be good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, one of them, I certainly won't name a name, but very famous creative director, no longer with us. I was with him for over an hour, during which I got to speak for about 1.5 minutes. And he spent most of the time haranguing me, why does a bum like you think you've got a chance of getting into this industry? So at the one end of the spectrum, I had that. At the other, I had a wonderful meeting with a man called Alan Hamilton, who was a group account director at Saatchi & Saatchi. And you've got to remember, these are the days that I put a letter under the doors of Charlotte Street the night before this meeting. And in that letter, it said, look, I don't want to waste your time. I really am passionate about advertising. I'd love to get into it. And I've been an English teacher, which means I can communicate to people from 8 to 80, whether they can speak the language or not. I'm good on my hind legs, and I can engage people and build empathy across all sorts of generations. And I love creativity. I think this might make me a useful addition. Anyway, great discussion with him. Says, I've got nothing, I'll be in touch. And then away I go, and, said to my wife, what a lovely guy, he was great, he was so helpful, thoughtful. And then about 3 months later, I got a letter that said, actually, there is an opening in another group, would you like to come and interview? So down to Alan Hamilton, God bless him. And also he had the fabulous grace, when I got my low job, he sent me the letter I'd popped to him, and on it he scribbled, I always knew you'd do well, good luck, that kind of thing. But that was the beginning of it. But it took me, and I'll never forget this, 1.5 years of non-stop grind. I did at the time, I thought, well, I better get, when the guy was basically saying I was a bum, I thought, oh, I need to get qualified. How can I get qualified? So I enrolled for the DIP CAM, unfortunately named, which was about the only thing you could do at the time, in what sounded to be fabulous, the West London Business School, which is actually a place in Acton. It was great teachers, by the way. And I started off a full-time course. I was teaching as well as doing that. And I got a year in, and that's when I got my job. But I also did the D&AD workshops, where you did 6 weeks, you'd go in and get a brief, because I thought I wanted to be a copywriter. But it was Dave Trott who, actually, when I talked to him about this a couple of years ago, hoping he would remember it fondly, he was incredibly rude, because I was saying it was you that suggested that I'd make a really good suit, actually, and even I'd be a fair to middling copywriter, I'd probably be much better as a suit. To which I won't say what he said a couple of years ago, but he was kind of right. So off I went into the world of account handling, courtesy of all that hard work. But then if you've taken that long, and Ritchie, I'm sure you see this with the people you help, if it's that difficult to get going, boy, do you value it when you've got it. And boy, do you appreciate that, oh, I've got this job, isn't this amazing? I won't waste a minute. I'll learn and I'll do everything I can. But long slog, thank you for asking, because I rarely get to tell that. I think my memory serves me pretty well. I'm sure people will point out to me if I'm wrong.
David, what a wonderful journey there. And like you say, even to get in was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. And like you said, the second you do, grab with both hands and fight. It is a grind and it's a hustle. And even till this day, probably even more so today with the multitude of options we have available. But may I talk about or ask you about the other end of the spectrum? So that was the way you got in. But I wonder if some of those principles have held you in really good stead as you were able to get into, say, your first marketing leadership roles, your first CMO roles. And the one thing that really struck me, or the phrase that kind of was resounding in my head, was you really were taking your chances. And when you're taking your chances And, whether that be door to door at Charlotte Street, whether it be those letters, all that kind of stuff. I just wonder, how much of that stuff has helped you get yourself and leverage yourself into probably some of the most renowned and reputable marketing leadership positions.
Oh, that's fabulous. I mean, if I go, let's go back to Alan Hamilton. I mean, I've tried when anybody's asked me, oh, I wonder if you can help me, can we have a cup of coffee? I've always tried to do that. And I've failed a few times, but I learned how important it is to help other people and to listen to them. So
I can validate that, by the way, guys. Absolutely. I emailed David off the cuff, and within a few short weeks, I was in his office having that cup of coffee. So I can totally relate to that. Sorry, over to you, David.
Yeah, but I mean, so that, very early lesson of valuing people. Saatchi's in the 80s was such a great learning ground. So the very first presentation course I did was actually John Ruditsky's dad, who had this, tell him what you're going to tell him, whatever it was. His kind of system is of 3 pillars, which I still used to this day. If I'm doing a presentation, I'll think through the way of doing that, structure myself, I'll write everything down. So, that one came with me as well. Certainly from Saatchi's, the absolute power of great creativity and how difficult it is to get and nurture and protect and look after that. And how fragile many of the people doing the work are, actually. So how to be thoughtful about that as well. So those were lessons learned early, and I think they were all useful. But when I first became a client, the Coca-Cola company, and I went to I went to Atlanta as worldwide head of advertising. And the first 6 weeks happened to be when all the countries were coming in to present their business plans to the CEO, CFO, and CMO. My boss, Sergio Zing, was the CMO, ranked 3rd in the company. So it was the 3 of them, and in the peanut gallery was Sergio's 6 direct reports. And I'm sitting there going, obviously, I've got the job. It's all about advertising. And 6 weeks later, I thought, that's amazing. Not once did anybody ever talk about advertising. Not once. It was so the humility of, because I presume that's what drove Coke. Now, that's not to say that advertising didn't and doesn't and hasn't had a remarkable impact on the brand, but it's a whole bunch of other things as well. So to remember, that this is the piece that you're doing. So actually, it was a relatively small piece to do. Sounds good, but doing the advertising for the Coca-Cola company was a tiny little cog in this gigantic machine. But to remember to value all the other pieces of the machine as well. So if I leap forward, probably in my Vodafone days, I used to make big internal meetings. If I was presenting stuff, I'd always get a laugh at the expense of the HR people at some point. It was easy shot at the time. Totally disrespectful. And then you learn as well, if you do that, don't worry, you will get strangled in the night. So you have to be respectful of people and actually to value all of it. And I suppose as I've reflected and looked back, what's lovely is to see that you're always learning something, a lot through mistakes, your own or other people's, and then you get the chance to go, right, how am I going to apply all of this learning all in one go and do it to the impact for the company? And that it felt like that in my last gig. Now, that was really, really satisfying. But you never stop learning. I mean, I'm learning all the time. I mean, you have to. I think it's the human condition. If you're not learning something every day, you're not making progress.
If you're not learning something every day, you're not making progress. I think we got an insight into your values there. You talked about humility, being respectful, continuous learning, and understanding that people are fragile. Which fantastic values to live and work by. Now, you also mentioned about presentations and presenting, and having seen you're a very good orator. And I don't know if that's being the teacher from when you had to do that in front of rowdy kids or whatever it was, but very specifically, and I've mentioned this to you before, I really loved your presentation, 7 Dumb Ways to Die, which was really about where marketing can go wrong, the derailers. So what are some of the things that you talked about there, which people should watch out for, those derailers?
Oh, that's another great question. I mean, first of all, I wish I could remember his name, but I was invited, the CEO of BBDO Greece great guy, Yorgos, somebody or other, sorry, Yorgos, asked me to go and do a presentation at one of his big events, and I did it. And afterwards he said, listen, he said, that you weren't being yourself, that was really dull. But you said, you're so not dull, just be yourself, don't do that. I've got to be serious and do all the charts, just be yourself, let go, you'll be good at it. And that was a really good intervention, because from then on in, I thought, right, I will try and say what I've got to say, but I'll try and find a different way to do it so that it'll be fun for me to prepare. And I had some great help in doing that, by the way. It wasn't always all me. And then it'll land better because you're simplifying it. But, to go back to the, Dumb Ways to Die, which I used a campaign from Australia, which I loved. And it was about rail safety, and it had this silly song, Dumb Ways to Die. It was an incredible piece of content they had done. And I had once said, I think in a presentation before that I thought branded content was the great red herring of our times and a waste of time. And I don't think that's true, actually. I think great branded content adds huge value, but even in its title, it's wrong. So I first of all, I was having a pop at chasing the shiny new. I mean, I think out of my mouth stumbled, don't be the dog that barks at every passing car.
That's the one.
And that is the thing, because I remember, people would turn up, and when I was at Vodafone, for instance, somebody said, oh, we've got to get on this thing, Second Life, it's amazing. We've got to get on it. I said, what does it cost? Cost this. What do we do? We do this anyway. On we go. We pile into Second Life. It's all great. So I think we were the first in and we were the first out. It's a bit like the metaverse it was there and then it was gone. If you read what Zuckerberg said, who knows? But that thing where marketeers love the shiny new, and tech has offered a lot of that. So the second thing I was then having a pop at, in the early days of the tech platforms, some of the metrics that they offered up were just horseshit, actually. And everybody was just falling in love with all of this stuff. No, you don't get it. We got to do Facebook. We got to do this. We got to do. Sorry, there are other platforms available, and they're all as evil as each other. No, we can edit that one out. But to get back to that point, it was don't trust just digital and data. Always have the common sense to stand back and look at the big picture. Brands need building, nurturing, thinking about. And actually, you've got to find a way to do all of the short-term stuff at the same time as doing the long-term stuff. But you also need to do that purposefully, as in, do we know what we're doing here? And are we doing the right thing? And are we doing it the right way? And the slow, steady nature of that to be balanced with the hectic speed available because of all the digital stuff. But I think what I was trying to do was to celebrate the power of creativity, because the fact that somebody had done something as wonderful as that, and the 7 lessons I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but they're available in the YouTube version of this presentation. So thank you for saying, Mark. But those, I see great progress. I remember I was talking with Nicola Mendelsohn when I was being very harsh on said platform. And I said, look, I got a new thing which I'm going to start using, which is we need to, at the time, I said, as it happens, you're now a 16-year-old child. I remember what it's like to have a 16-year-old child. They're unruly learning, all with the best of intent, but they need a bit of boundaries putting around them as they grow up to being an adult. And I said, that's how I'm going to talk about you as a company now, because I think that's kind of where you are and you're learning and developing, and hopefully you'll be a force for good. And on the whole, they are, but they could have done more faster. So I think that's the other key thing I was talking about, which is don't be afraid to question and speak out, and don't just accept that all of this stuff is brilliant, because it's not necessarily brilliant.
And David, just how many of those rules have now come to bear? And quite interesting how there was a lot of foresight that obviously went in to the marketing Dumb Ways to Die. So there we go, guys. Everyone, do check them out. They're actually on YouTube. I saw them a little while ago as well, and it's a fantastic talk. David, I want to come on to something which perhaps is slightly related to mentoring and the role of mentoring. But as Mark said, that your Herald is probably one of the most renowned marketers in our industry, and I've got plenty of badges to prove the case. And I just want to ask about the role of networks in the context of actually creating great, effective both work personally as well as, of course, business impact. And I mean, have you found it to be valuable? And perhaps what is your sort of guidance on networking for people who may feel they don't do it as effectively?
Another great question. Let me use the word community rather than network, because again, if I think about the MGGB, what a great community that's been along the way. I've had my ups, I've had my downs. And when people were really magnificent is when I was on my downs. I remember turning up when I didn't have a job, and the people come up and go, "Hey, how are you? You're right." And so that community that you become part of, who are there to support and help you, is important. It should be respected. So there's some irony in this, in that probably in my very early days, I would have sniffed at things like the Marketing Society and the Marketing Group of Great Britain and go, "What do I want to do that for?" And in a way, I was influenced. When I was in the States, Dan Wyden used to talk about the 4 A's in quite harsh terms, and why aren't people just getting on with their jobs instead of standing around at these conferences? That kind of speech, you can imagine. But you've got to now, whether you do it consciously or not, I don't know, because nobody ever believes me when I say this, but I'm fundamentally shy. I'm fine if I know people and you put me in a room, but that notion, and I used to talk to my wonderful ex-boss Ross McEwen about this. Ross was the best walkabout manager I've ever seen, because he would engage with everybody. He was totally comfortable talking about it, talking to anybody, going, "Hey," and you got to do more of that. And then I would go, "Oh yeah, okay, right, let's go and do it," and find it really painful to do, actually. So there's that version of networking. But when you're in a space where everybody's got common values and interests, and that would be something like the MGGB, you inevitably build a whole series of contacts that you should never be ashamed of using or find difficult to use. And I'll insert here, I think it was after I'd lost my Vodafone job, I did get that bit when I could feel I was losing another thing, which was pretty important, was my confidence. So I remember looking at the phone thinking, I must call so and so, and then I couldn't pick the phone up. I was kind of, I can't do that. But actually, nobody should ever do that, because I think we're in a sector which is really fundamentally the people business, and people are so happy to help other people. You just got to ask, actually. So, I've really learned the importance of growing and building a network along the way. I was never particularly conscious of doing that. I did, and in a way, I regret that, actually, because if I think of all of the fantastic people I've met, had I been better at keeping in touch, I'd now have a wonderful community around me. I've got a wonderful community around me, I should say, but I could have had an even bigger one. So, for those that might listen to this, value that beyond anything else, almost, because it matters so much.
Thank you, David, for showing a bit of vulnerability, because who knew that somebody like yourself would describe themselves as shy, or have had times where confidence was rattled. So thank you. So you mentioned that you rocked up to MGGB at a point in time you didn't have a job. So I mean, you've alluded to the fact that life is not perfect, careers are not perfect, they're full of wobbles and squiggles. So it'd be great if you could share with us maybe one of your squiggly moments, and how you found the resilience, how you bounced back, some of that bounce back ability.
Well, I think the squiggliest moment was when I was president of BBDO Europe, and this is 99.5% my fault, because when I was hired, I happened to be approached, and I'll try and not break too many confidences here, but just as two or three things were happening in our family. My wife is Spanish, as you know. We're very proud Europeans. Brexit, worst moment of my life. And our kids, even though they went to the international school, were relentlessly becoming Americans, and we wanted them to be Europeans. So Daniel, my now 37-year-old, when he was a 10-year-old, would arrive and like, "Hey, Dad, how you doing?" I was going, "Oh my God!" So we were thinking, "Oh, we need to get back to Europe." I'd also got to the bit when I was going, this is just sugared water making people fat. So, once I got beyond so I loved my job at Coke, don't get me wrong. and what am I going to do next? And my wife was pregnant with our third child. Somebody popped up. So in asking me to go and do this job, the cardinal sin was everything I asked about was me. I'm going to need to be in Atlanta a week, a month, and you're going to need to pay for that. And I'm, all that stuff. And boy, did I get a great deal. What I didn't do was actually ask the only questions that matter, which is what's this job all about and what will success look like for you, for me, and how will I know if I'm being successful and how are you going to measure me and all of that. I didn't do that. And I also didn't ask the other thing, which is what's the nitty gritty shit of this job that you're not telling me about? So those are two questions I learned the hard way by not asking them. Anyway, sure enough, I then start this job and I rang my wife on the second day of a board meeting we were having in Paris saying, I've made this terrible mistake. They don't need this. They don't need me to do this. This is, this is a non-role. I can't see what I'm going to do. And then we agreed that I'd grin and bear it and continue. And I became moderately successful by uniting Europe around the common enemy. And the common enemy was BBDO New York. Now, there's something breathtakingly stupid in that sentence I just said. They were also the people that hired me and paid me. So building the European community by having, not built the great relationship with the one that mattered led to me getting fired, actually. And I got fired in a way which I'll never forget. Said man took me to the Oak Room and said, started, and he was a Frenchman. I was about to do the very politically incorrect thing of using a French accent, but I won't do that. And his opening salvo was, this conversation is going to be much more difficult for me than it is for you. And then said, read this. And then gave me a letter. And it was basically my resignation letter. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I think I went to Hyde Park and sat crying for about 3 hours. I was totally destroyed, didn't know what to do. But, the lessons of all of that is all my fault. I hadn't asked the right questions on the way in. I hadn't respected the people I worked for and what they needed of me in the right way. And I hadn't had the humility to go, I got that wrong. So my own hubris was my own downfall. But boy, was that a good lesson. And because that's where, and I like the question, the sub-bit of that is, how do you then get your resilience back? Because I literally thought I'd never get a job again. I mean, and then a couple of people said to me, don't be daft, think about this, think about that. And people were very helpful. Michael Bulk at the time, who ended up, he was the CEO of AMB, but he then became president of BBDO Europe as well. He was incredibly helpful about, look, shit happens, So there's a flip side to everything you just said, which is they kind of lied to you in the interview process. So don't beat yourself up so much, but do learn the lesson. And people helped me slowly but surely, rebuild my confidence, and off I got going again. Because you do, and you discover the resilience. But those two questions, I always urge people, when you're being hired, make sure you know what success looks like, and it is for you personally, for the person you report to, for the company you work for, and make sure you get the metrics in place to measure that, and make sure you return to that conversation on a regular basis, because then you're set. But when I did that with Ross McEwen, because by then I'd learned, he said, look, your job is to help us, shareholders haven't had a drink for a long while. We need to get this company back to profit. You're going to help me do that. We need to turn the reputation of the company around. You're going to help me do that. And you need to get me out of here with my reputation intact. And when you've done that, your job will be done too. And how are we going to know? And then we had the metrics, and that's exactly what happened. And boy, did he have my back and was helpful and thoughtful. But a bit of that is because I've learned to ask the questions. But when I said to him, what's the nitty gritty shit of the job you're not telling me about? He roared with laughter. He said, I think I've told you. He said, but just to remind you. And he picked up this file, and let's say it was like that. Those were all the legal problems coming down the track at what was then RBS, and and we waded through all of that. All the fines got paid, but that was a great we effort. That was a real team thing. But that then leads me to my other big lesson: is I think it's disproportionately important the person you report to. So the impact on my career at a points in time that my boss had on me, good and bad, was extraordinary. Now, and you do learn a lot because, you know, as I also say to people, you know, the corporate world, get used to it. You're going to have to deal with lots of arseholes, but that's part of, you know, the way you have to work. And you have to deal with the good and the bad as you see them. But when you get lucky enough to work for somebody who's got your back, who values you for what you do and who you are basically in heaven, actually. And the same job in the same company can be totally different if the boss changes.
Yeah, David. You're absolutely so bang on that one. It's of course that cliche saying, right? You don't leave a company, you leave your boss, right? And that's it's so resonant there. David, honestly, such some wonderful lessons and anecdotes there. And thank you for sharing that probably quite difficult moment in time, you know, when you get handed your own resignation letter. That's just like not something you want to be faced with. But you know, the humility to think that actually it was like you say, you took it on your own shoulders about why you reached that position. Probably you're being a bit unkind to yourself, but there you are. David, look, I think it's been such a wonderful session there. In fact, you stole my last question because I was going to ask about line managers and bosses. So we'll leave it there for today. So I just really want to say, I mean, how wonderful that it's been to be able to speak to you this morning. And actually beyond that, how much I really do appreciate you and your perspectives and your insights. I mean, you've just really shared with us so many great things from your time as being what is an incredible marketing leader. So I've got a really tough job now, quite frankly. I mean, I've got flipping pages and pages of notes here to try and summarize some of the key themes. So I'll probably do a terrible job of it, but forgive me for that. I mean, I think you kicked off, you know, beyond travel costs and young families and the tribulations, probably sometimes even harder than actually what professional life has to bring. I'm certainly finding that sometimes, certainly in some days anyway. But there you go. You know, a golden time in marketing today, so much changing, so much has changed. But I think the central theme through that has been the role of learning. Whether it be some of your thoughts about the macro perspective, or of course, you know, you use this amazing phrase, you know, if you don't learn every day, you are not making progress. And I think that really sums up, as Mark talked to, some of those core values that you hold really dear, the role of learning through the process. You know, you also as part of that said, you know, you really don't know all the things that you think you do. And I think that just speaks to your humility as well. We talked about the role of helping others quite a lot, and actually how marketing is inherently a people business. And actually the role of networks, stroke communities, as you like to call them, are invaluable. And in fact, if there was a golden nugget that you said we should take away, is actually to form and foster those communities more early on in your career and hold them even more dear. Maybe even start a podcast just like you and us did. Maybe that's a good way of harnessing some more communities. I love the word, you know, it's funny, you coin a lot of phrases, and actually you've had a lot of things said or thrown at you, whether it's rock stars right through to bums, to being a bum all the way, right? Lots of names being thrown. But that's great. You know, you're somebody who really, you know, embraces all of that. You talked about the role of agency versus client side and some of the fun aspects of both, which is interesting. Blue pitches where you narrowly miss out on things. It's the but moment that comes through. Talked a lot about the progression of women in the workplace and how things have dramatically shifted. A real positive note of optimism that we see, but yet, of course, things still need to go through and continue on in this sort of way. Resilience and the role of taking chances early on in your career that have really stayed with you throughout that process. And being respectful across that to all people. And I love the turn of phrase when you said people in the most creative of positions are actually highly fragile. And part of your role in agencies and being an agency leader is to actually hold and understand that fragility and make sure that you're respectful with it in that sense. Some amazing presentations from you, Dumb Ways to Die, or Marketing's Dumb Ways to Die, and a lot of those predictions perhaps and insights you shared in that presentation years ago have now come to fruition. So that's, I guess, maybe satisfying on some level as well. I guess finally, just to finish off, your thoughts around how confidence plays a fundamental role in your career, both of the highs and the lows, fundamentally being a shy person, which of course is a little bit hard to believe, but actually, you know, that in itself is really enduring. And it's how I guess you turn that shyness and actually turn it on its head into relatability and empathy for others. So I think that's kind of where I will stop. So many great things to share with us this morning. So thank you once again, David. It's been an absolute pleasure. David Wheldon OBE coming on the show. Thank you.
Ritchie, I was just going to say that my little two penneth worth. You said something after Anna Hamilton about I won't waste a minute, and boy, I think you've lived to that mantra. Thank you, David.
Well, thank you very much. And as you rightly predicted, I enjoyed that too. I don't get to tell those stories, but it's interesting, because it's nice to be able to share them, because I don't think people share enough of the down bits, actually. And out of the down bits, because you get remarkable resilience through those things, actually. You really do. Good.
Thank you.
Well, that was great fun. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
And you do it very well, actually. Great double act too, because it makes it easier in a way.
Yeah. We try.
Yeah, no, you do it very well.